Ethan Cole. Walker dropped to one knee in the dirt and held out the last strip of jerky in his saddlebag to a little girl the whole town of Ridgewater had decided not to see. 17 days she'd sat on those steps. 17 days and not one soul asked her name. "When'd you last eat, miss?" he said quiet. And what she answered would change both their lives forever. If a story about a forgotten child and the cowboy who wouldn't walk away moves you, subscribe and stay with me till the very end. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The strip of jerky lay across his open palm, and the child stared at it like she'd forgotten what hunger was supposed to do. "Go on," Ethan said. "It ain't a trick." She didn't move. Her hands stayed knotted in her lap, small and chapped, the knuckles gone red from too many cold mornings she shouldn't have had in the middle of July. She had a way of holding still that no 7-year-old ought to know. Like a rabbit that had learned the long way that running only made the dog faster. "Name's Walker," he said. "Folks call me Ethan." He stayed down on that knee, even though the boards of Brennan's General Store had a smell to them now, the smell of a body that had been left too long in one place. "What's yours?" A long beat. Then barely Daisy. Daisy. He nodded slow, like she'd told him something worth a great deal. "That's a fine name. Daisy, what? Harper." Her chin lifted half an inch. "Daisy Harper. My papa's Tom Harper. He works the horses." "Does he? He's coming back." She said it the way some folks say their prayers fast and certain before they can hear how it sounds out loud. "He told me to wait right here, on the steps. He said, 'Don't you move, Daisy. Don't you take one step off these boards and I'll come for you.' So I'm waitin'." Ethan kept his face the way you keep a horse calm, still, even nothing in it that would spook her. "How long you been waitin', Daisy Harper?" "Don't know." Her eyes dropped to the jerky again. "A while." Behind him, boots scuffed the street. A woman in a Sunday bonnet crossed clear to the far side, gathering her skirts up out of the dust like the girl on the steps was a puddle she might step in. She didn't look. She'd gotten good at not looking. "Ma'am," Ethan said. She walked faster. He turned back to the child and pushed the jerky an inch closer. "Tell you what, your papa'd want you keepin' your strength up for when he gets here. Man comes back for his girl, he wants to find her standing tall, not poorly. You eat, and you'll be ready." That did it. Where Charity had failed her father's name worked like a key. Daisy's hand came off her lap quick and ashamed, and snatched the jerky, and she ate with her shoulders hunched around it, the way the starving do, like the food might be taken if she didn't hide it. He'd seen grown men eat like that. He'd never wanted to see a child do it. "Easy," he said. "Easy now, nobody's taken it." The store door banged. "You there?" Silas Brennan filled the doorway in his apron, a heavy man with soft hands and a hard mouth. "We don't feed her on these steps. You feed her, she keeps coming back." Ethan rose to his full height, unhurried, and set his hat square. "She ain't come back, mister. Near as I can tell, she never left. That's the trouble." Brennan jerked his chin at the boards. 17 days she's been roosting on my front step. Bad for trade. Folks don't want to walk past." He stopped himself. "Past what?" Ethan's voice didn't rise. It got flatter, which in him was worse. "Past a hungry child on your steps in your town." "She ain't mine." Brennan's eyes cut sideways up the street down it. "She ain't anybody's. That's the long and short. You want to play Good Samaritan, take her up the road and play it somewhere else." 17 days. Ethan let it sit there in the heat. "You stepped over her 17 days. I got a business to run. And not one of you sent for her people." Brennan's jaw worked. "Wasn't our place." Whose place was it? The store owner had no answer for that, so he did what men do when they're caught with nothing. He got angry. "I don't have to explain myself to a drifter. Now move her along, or I'll fetch the sheriff, and he'll move you both." "Fetch him," Ethan said. "I'd like a word." The diner was 3 doors down, and Ethan walked the child to it with one hand light on her shoulder, not gripping just there, so she'd know which way. She walked stiff. She kept looking back at the steps. "He'll know I moved," she said. "Papa," he said, "don't move. He'll know you went and got fed and stayed close." Ethan held the door. "That ain't movin'. That's waitin' smart." Mrs. Abigail Brown looked up from her counter and went still, the rag stopping mid-circle. She was a wide, capable woman with flour on her forearms and a face that had decided somewhere along the years to be kind, even when it cost her. It was costing her now. He could see it. "Mr. she said low, "you don't want to do this." "Want's got nothing to do with it, ma'am." He guided Daisy onto a stool. "She'll have whatever's hot and a glass of milk, and you'll let me pay for it. It ain't the pay." Abigail came around the counter, wiping her hands, and crouched down to the child's level the way Ethan had, and something moved across her face that was close to shame. "Hello, Daisy. You hungry, sugar?" Daisy nodded. "Course you are." She straightened and looked at Ethan, and now her voice dropped to where the child couldn't catch it. "I brought her bread, twice, first week. Left it on the step at night so nobody'd—" She stopped. "So nobody'd see." "So nobody'd see you doing a Christian thing," Ethan said. "In daylight." The flush climbed her neck. "You don't know this town, mister." "I'm getting acquainted." "There's reasons folks leave her be." Abigail set a plate in front of the girl, stew a heel of bread, and Daisy bent over it. "Reasons that ain't all cruelty, though Lord knows there's cruelty enough." "Then tell me the reasons." But the bell over the door rang before she could, and her mouth closed like a drawer. Chapter 2. The man who came in wore black wool in July and didn't seem to feel it. He was lean and pressed, and his boots had never seen a stirrup. He carried a leather case under one arm the way a parson carries a Bible, and he smiled at the room before the room had done anything to earn it. "Mrs. Brown." He removed his hat. "And a new face. How fortunate." "Mr. Voss?" Abigail's voice had gone careful. "We're not open for—" "For me, you're always open." Harlan Voss crossed to the counter and set his case down soft, and his eyes went to the child eating and then to Ethan, and they did a slow accounting of him, the dust, the worn leather, the gun he didn't make a show of. "And you'd be passin' through. A great many men are passing through." Voss smiled wider. "Few of them stop." He looked at Daisy. "Especially for that one." He said it gentle. That was the thing Ethan would remember, how gentle the man could make a cruel thing sound. "Tragic little case. I've been trying to see her properly placed for nigh on 2 weeks. There's a county home, you understand, in Cheyenne. Clean. Run by the sisters. A child can't live on a step." "No," Ethan said. "She can't. Funny how she did, though, for 17 days with a county home a wire away." Voss's smile held, but his eyes cooled. "Paperwork, sir. The wheels of charity turn slow. Custody of an abandoned minor is a legal matter. It can't be done with a handshake and a plate of stew." He opened the case an inch, just enough to show the edge of a document, then closed it again, like a man closing a music box. "I have the forms drawn. The town's spared the expense. All it wants is a signature from someone with standing." He tipped his head. "You don't have standing, I'm afraid. So perhaps you'll let those of us who do see to her." "Mr. Voss is a man of business," Abigail said quickly, a warning folded inside it. "Land and loans. He's done a great deal for Ridgewater." "I'll bet he has." Voss took his hat back up. "I'll leave the child to her supper. Mrs. Brown, the matter we discussed. Friday." He set a coin on the counter more than the meal cost and let it sit there gleaming. Then he was gone, and the door's bell rang behind him like a thing relieved. Ethan looked at the coin a long moment. "He buys his way into a lot of rooms, that one. He buys most of them." Abigail swept the coin into her apron without quite meeting his eye. "He holds paper on half this street, mine included." She set both hands flat on the counter. "Now you see why folks look the other way. A man crosses Harlan Voss, he finds his note called early, his store padlocked, his family on the road." She nodded at Daisy. "That child's a Harper. And Harper's a name that put Voss in a foul mood for the better part of a year. Why? Abigail's mouth set. It ain't mine to tell. The sheriff came at his own pace, which was the pace of a man hoping the trouble might settle itself before he arrived. Ezra Cole was gray at the temples and tired in the eyes, a star pinned to a chest that had stopped expecting much from the job. He stood in the diner door and took in the cowboy, the child, the empty plate. "Brennan says you're stirrin'," he said. "Brennan's a man who confuses a child with a stray dog." Ethan turned on his stool. "Sheriff, that girl's been sitting on the steps of that store 17 days. I'd like to know what the law's done about it." The law. Ezra came in and let the door swing shut. "The law's got no statute makes a town love a child it didn't ask for, son. She ain't been harmed. She ain't broke no ordinance. She's been starved. By neglect, not by hand." Ezra said it like it tasted bad. "There's a difference in the books, even if there ain't one in the Bible." "Where's her father?" A pause. Just a flicker. But Ethan made his living reading horses, and a man's eyes weren't much harder. The sheriff knew something, and the knowing sat on him heavy. "Tom Harper rode out," Ezra said. "Some weeks back." "Rode out where?" "Dalton's. Hired on at the ranch." Ezra took off his hat and turned it in his hands. "Wrangler work. Good with green stock, they say. Better with horses than with money." His eyes flicked to the child and away. "Left the girl in town where it was safe. Told her to wait. And then nothing." Ezra put the hat back on. "He didn't come for her." "Men come back for their children, Sheriff. Most do." The lawman's voice had gone quiet now, and there was something under it. Something he was choosing every word to step around. "Some can't." Daisy had stopped eating. She was watching the two men with the bread held halfway to her mouth, her eyes going from one to the other, and Ethan saw the danger and changed his face fast. "Daisy," he said easy. "You done? You want pie, Mrs. Brown? I expect makes a respectable pie." "I do," said Abigail too brightly. "He's coming back." Daisy said it to the sheriff, not to Ethan. To the man with the star, like she'd been waiting all this time for someone official to confirm it. "My papa. He told me wait. You know him. He's got a brown horse. Her name's Juniper. You tell him I waited just like he said. You tell him I didn't move." Ezra Cole opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You tell him," Daisy said, and the silence in that diner went on a beat too long. A beat the child was too young to read, but old enough to feel, and her certainty wavered for the first time, just a hairline crack, the kind that runs through ice before it gives. "Eat your pie, sugar," Abigail said, and her voice broke clean in the middle of it. Ethan walked the sheriff out to the porch where the girl couldn't hear. "You know," he said. "You and Brennan and that man in black you all know, and you've been letting her sit out there 17 days believing different. That what passes for mercy in Ridgewater. It ain't mercy." Ezra leaned on the post, looking out at the street where the light was getting long and gold. "It's cowardice with good manners, which I grant you is worse." He was quiet a while. "Tom Harper's dead, mister." Ethan said nothing. 3 weeks back, a green stallion at Dalton's came over backward in the round pen and put him under it. He was gone before they got the horse off him." Ezra rubbed a hand down his face. "Henry Dalton sent word to town. Word got to Brennan. Brennan got to thinking about who'd pay to bury him and feed the girl and ship her to the county, and nobody wanted the bill, so word just stopped, right there on Brennan's step, same place the child stopped." "And Voss?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Now you're asking the real question." "I'm asking it." Ezra looked at him a long moment, weighing whether the cost of telling was worth less than the cost of carrying it alone. He'd been carrying it alone 17 days. It showed. "Tom Harper wasn't always a wrangler," he said. "Came to this valley 8 years back and filed on a quarter section up the Sweetwater. Worthless ground, everybody said. Sage and stone." He paused. "Except there's a spring on it. Year-round water. And this valley's got exactly enough water to make half the men in it rich and the other half ruined depending who holds the wet ground. His eyes came up. Harlan Voss has been buying the wet ground, quiet. Note by note, parcel by parcel. He owns the creek above and the creek below. He offered Tom Harper a fair price once and a foul one twice, and Harper turned him down all 3 times. Said he was keeping it for the girl. Said a man ought to leave his child something that's hers. Ethan felt the whole shape of it settle into place the way a saddle settles when you finally cinch it true. Then Harper dies, he said slow, and the one thing standing between Voss and that water is a 7-year-old on a store step who don't know her papa's gone. Ezra nodded. Long as she sits there lost and unclaimed and headed for a county home 200 miles off, that claim sits in a dead man's name with nobody to defend it. Voss files on the abandonment, the court calls it forfeit, and come fall the only water in this end of the valley belongs to him. He spat off the porch. He ain't hurried about it. Why would he times doing his work for free? Every day that child sits there, the more abandoned she looks on paper. He's just waiting her out, same as he waited her papa out, and the town lets him. The town owes him. Ezra's voice was flat with old shame. Most of it does anyhow. You cross Voss, you lose your roof. So they look away and tell themselves she's just a sad little thing nobody can help. Inside through the window, Ethan could see Daisy at the counter. She'd finished the pie. She'd climbed down off the stool. And she was standing at the glass, looking out at the street toward Brennan's steps, because she'd been gone too long, and her papa might come, and he'd told her not to move. What's she got? Ethan said. He left her something. A girl don't sit a watch 17 days on nothing but a promise. Ezra frowned. Got what? Ethan went back inside. He crouched down in front of the child the way he had on the steps, slow, his hands open. Daisy, your papa give you anything to hold for him before he rode out? She went guarded all at once, both hands pressing flat against the front of her dress, against something tucked inside it. I'm not supposed to show nobody. I know. He kept his voice low and steady just for her. I ain't asking to take it. I'm asking to keep it safe alongside you. That's a different thing. She studied him. 7 years old, and she studied him like a banker studies a stranger's signature looking for the lie. He let her look. He'd told her no lies yet, and he reckoned children kept a tally truer than most men gave them credit for. He said, she whispered, give it to him when he comes. Only him. He said it's worth more'n the whole town, and I gotta guard it good. Her chin trembled just once and steadied. So I've been guarding it. You done a fine job. Slowly watching his face the whole time, she drew it out from inside her dress, a square of oilcloth folded and folded again, soft and grimed at the creases from 17 days against her skin. She didn't hand it over. She just opened it there in her own 2 hands, enough for him to see. A deed. State Land Office seal. A description in a surveyor's clean hand quarter section. Sweetwater drainage, the spring marked plain, and the name on it written firm by a man who'd meant it to last. Held in trust for Daisy Harper, my daughter. Ethan read it twice. Then he looked up at the child guarding a fortune she couldn't read. On a step a whole town had agreed to step over with a dead father, she was still expecting to walk through the door. And he understood finally and completely that she had never once been abandoned by accident. She'd been left to be forgotten on purpose. He folded the oilcloth back over the deed, slow and careful, and pressed it gentle into her small hands, and closed her fingers around it with both of his. You hold on to that, Ethan said, and his voice had gone rough and certain and final. You hold on to it tight, Daisy Harper. Nobody's taken it, and nobody's taken you. He stood and set his hat and looked at the door where a town full of men had decided a child was easier ignored than saved. Not while I'm standing. That word hung in the diner like smoke that wouldn't clear, and it was Abigail who broke it. You can't stand, she said. You can't stand against Harlan Voss, mister. Nobody can. You're one man with a horse and a saddle, and he's got the bank and the court and half this street owing him their roofs. She came around the counter again, wringing the rag. I admire you. God help me, I do. But admiring a man don't keep him alive. I ain't asking to be admired. Ethan reached for his hat. I'm asking what happened to the girl's claim. You know land. You said it yourself, he holds paper on half this street. Tell me how a man takes a dead man's land off a living child. He don't take it. Abigail's voice dropped. He waits for the court to give it. There's a thing called abandonment. A claim's got to be worked or held or defended. A dead man can't do none of those, and a child can't neither, not in the eyes of the law. So if there's nobody to stand for her, there's somebody now. You ain't kin. She said it flat, the way you say a thing you wish weren't true. You ain't her father, you ain't her guardian. You ain't got a paper in this world says you can speak for that child. You're a drifter who bought her a plate of stew. She looked at him hard. Voss'll tear you apart in a courtroom and smile doing it. He's done it before. To who? Abigail's mouth closed. To who, ma'am? To Tom Harper, she said finally. First, before the horse ever got him. Get away. The sheriff had been standing in the doorway through all of it, and now he stepped back in, and the light from the street put half his face in shadow. She's right, Ezra said. Harper went to law over that water 1.5 years back. Filed a complaint saying Voss was moving his fence line, diverting the upper creek onto his own ground in the dry months. He was right, too. Anybody with eyes could see it. He shook his head slow. But Voss had paper. Survey paper. New survey paper done by a man Voss pays. And the court took the paper over the eyes. Harper walked out of that courthouse owing costs he couldn't pay, and the only thing he had left clear was that quarter section with the spring. Ezra's jaw worked. That's when Voss started in with the offers. Knew the man was bleeding. Figured he'd sell that last piece just to eat. But he didn't sell. No. Something almost like respect crossed the sheriff's worn face. He took the wrangler job at Dalton's instead. Said he'd work himself to the bone before he'd hand his girl's birthright to a thief. Left her in town where there was a school and a church and folks to look after her. He stopped. He trusted this town to look after her. The three of them stood with that. The child at the window paid them no mind. She was still watching the steps. And the town looked after her, Ethan said, by stepping over her 17 days. Nobody answered because there was no answer that wasn't a confession. He didn't sleep at the livery that night. He sat up in the loft with his back to a beam and his hat on his knee and turned the whole thing over, the way a man turns a horse problem, not the angry parts, the working parts. A child with a deed, a dead father who'd seen this coming, who'd folded that paper into oilcloth and pressed it on a 7-year-old because he trusted his daughter over his neighbors. A man in black wool waiting on a court to hand him a spring. A town in his pocket. And a sheriff who knew all of it and had a star and a conscience and not one idea what to do with either. It would have been easy to ride out. Ethan had ridden out of worse and from kinder towns. He'd built a whole life out of the riding out of the cabin where his wife and his own boy had died of the fever in a single hard week 4 winters back. Out of every place since, that started to feel like a place a man might stop. Staying was how you got something to lose. He'd learned that with a shovel in his hands and the ground frozen too hard to dig proper. And he'd promised himself kneeling at 2 graves he'd had to chip out by lantern that he would never again let the world hand him something it could take away. And here the world had set a child on a store step in his path. Toward dawn he gave it up and admitted to himself what he'd known since he'd closed her fingers around that oilcloth. He wasn't going to ride out. He was just going to be a fool about it slow instead of fast. Brennan had her off the steps by the time Ethan came down the street next morning, or trying to. The store owner had a broom and was sweeping at the boards near her feet, not touching her, just sweeping the dust up against her shoes again and again, the way a man shoes something he won't lower himself to pick up. Go on, Brennan was saying. Git, you been told. You ain't sittin' my step another day. Daisy had backed up against the wall with her arms wrapped around her middle, both hands flat against the front of her dress over the deed, and she wasn't moving because moving meant the steps, and the steps was where her papa had told her to be. He said, wait here, she said. He said this exact step. I can't go nowhere. Your papa ain't. Brennan. Ethan's voice cut down the street, even and cold. Set the broom down. The store owner straightened. This is my property. And that's a child. Ethan came up the board slow. You sweep dirt at her one more time and we'll see how the broom suits you. Brennan's face went red, but he lowered it. You think you're something. You think you'll make this town feel small for not wanting a stray. Well, I got news. We tried. First few days, folks brought her things. Bread. A blanket. Mrs. Brown there fed her. He jabbed the broom handle toward the diner. And then days went by and her pa didn't come, and it got to where every man who walked past her felt like a sinner. You understand that she made us feel like sinners just by sitting there. A body can only stand feeling like a sinner so long before he gets to hating the thing that makes him feel it. It was, Ethan thought, the most honest thing anyone in Ridgewater had said yet. And the ugliest. So you hate her, he said, for your own guilt. I want her gone, Brennan said, so I can stop feeling it. Then you're in luck. Ethan stepped past him and held his hand down to the child. Daisy, we're going for a ride. Her eyes went wide and her arms tightened. No. No, I can't, he said. I know what he said. Ethan crouched. He said, wait. And you waited 17 days, Daisy Harper, and there ain't a soldier in any army held a post braver than you held this one. But here's the thing about waitin'. Sometimes the person you're waiting for can't come to where you are. Sometimes you got to go find out why. He held her gaze. I'm going to take you to the last place your papa was, the ranch where he worked, and we're going to ask after him straight, the two of us. That ain't leaving your post. That's a scout going out and coming back with word. You follow. She wanted to follow. He could see her wanting to see the wall of 17 days starting to crack under the weight of being offered for the first time a way to do something other than sit and hope. And if he ain't there, she whispered, then we'll know more than we know now. It wasn't a lie. He'd decided he wasn't going to tell her any. And whatever we know, you won't be finding it out alone. That part I'll promise you. The finding out part you don't do alone no more. She looked at his open hand, a long, long moment. Then she put her small one in it. Behind them, Brennan watched a drifter walk off down the street, holding the hand of the child he'd swept at. And for a moment, something moved across the store owner's face that might have been relief and might have been shame, and was likely both because they live in the same house. Dalton's ranch sat 8 miles up the valley, where the grass got better and the water told you so. Daisy rode in front of Ethan in the saddle stiff, at first gripping the horn, and then by the 3rd mile leaning back against him without knowing she did it the way a child's body trusts before a child's mind catches up. She talked the whole way. He understood before long that she'd had 17 days of nobody to talk to, and the words had built up in her like water behind a beaver dam, and now that someone had opened a gap, they came out in a flood, her papa's brown mare Juniper, who'd let Daisy braid her tail. The song he sang that wasn't any real song, just nonsense. He made up the way he smelled like leather and horses and pipe smoke. The cabin up the Sweetwater they'd lived in before, with the spring her papa called the best water in Wyoming territory. And don't you let nobody tell you different, Daisy girl. He says it's mine, she told him. The water. He says when I'm growed it'll be mine, and I can build a big house right by it and have all the horses I want. She paused. That's what's in the paper. He told me. He can't read good, and I can't read at all, but he told me what it says. It says the land is Daisy's. She craned her head back to look at him. Can you read? I can read. Did it say that, when you looked, did it say the land is Daisy's? Ethan rode a few paces. It said, he answered carefully, held in trust for Daisy Harper, my daughter, which means your papa wanted it kept safe for you till you're grown. Yes, it's yours. She faced front again, satisfied, and was quiet a while, and then she said in a smaller voice, then he's got to come back, 'cause it's not mine yet. He's still keeping it for me. He wouldn't leave before I'm growed, he promised. And Ethan, who had decided he would tell this child no lies, found that there are silences that lie worse than words, and rode on holding one, because he was a coward too. In the end, just a slower one than the town. Henry Dalton met them at the corral, a broad old man with a white mustache and hands like saddle leather, and Ethan knew from the way the rancher's face changed when he saw the child that the sheriff had told it true. "That's never Tom's girl," Dalton said quietly. "It is." Ethan swung down and lifted Daisy after him and kept himself between the child and the rancher's face until he could catch the man's eye and give him a hard, plain look, not in front of her. Dalton, to his credit, caught it. "Mr. Dalton," Ethan said, even and easy. "Daisy, here's come to ask after her father, Tom Harper. Worked your green stock. We'd be obliged for whatever you can tell us." It was a sentence built like a fence, every rail placed to keep the rancher inside a lie. They could all survive for one more hour, and Dalton was old enough and kind enough to see the fence and stay behind it. "Tom Harper." He cleared his throat. "Yes, fine hand. Best I had with a spooky colt." He looked at Daisy and his eyes were wet, and he covered it by pulling off his hat. "You'd be Daisy then. He talked about you. Talked about you all day, near drove the other hands to drink." A real smile, watery. "Said his girl could outride half the men in this valley by the time she's 12. Daisy's whole face opened. "Where is he?" And there it was. The question that emptied the air out of the corral. Dalton looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back and gave the smallest shake of his head, and the old rancher swallowed whatever he'd been about to say and built another rail. "He had to go a ways off," Dalton said gently, "on account of some trouble. Grown-up trouble. The kind that takes a while to set right." He knelt down the way they all seemed to find themselves kneeling for this child, like she pulled grown men to her level by some gravity of the small and wronged. "But I'll tell you what he left here, Missy. He left an account. Wages owing. 3 weeks of hard work he never collected." He looked up at Ethan, and now the lie and the truth braided together into something useful. "By rights, that money's his girl's. $40 and some. I'd be easier in my mind handing it to someone looking after her." "There's nobody looking after her," Ethan said. "Officially, that's the trouble." "Then make it official." "I'm working on it." Dalton stood and put his hat back on, and the two men understood each other across the head of a 7-year-old. "There's a hand's cabin stands empty," the rancher said. "Bottom of the home pasture. And I'm short a man since—" He caught himself. "Since Tom. I could use somebody good with green stock. Pay ain't much. Cabin comes with it. Room for 2. Ethan went still. He felt the offer for what it was. A door swung open into the exact thing he'd spent 4 years riding away from. A place. A roof. A reason to stay long enough to lose something. "I'll think on it," he said, which was a lie because he'd already decided, and the deciding scared him worse than Voss did. So, they were watering the horse at the trough before the ride back when one of Dalton's hands came over a lean young cowboy with a quick mouth and eyes that had already decided things about Ethan. Cole Pruitt, he called himself. He looked at the child, and he looked at Ethan, and he hooked his thumbs in his belt. "Heard Dalton offering you Tom's cabin," Pruitt said. "Tom's job, Tom's wages." He spat. "Tom ain't cold yet, and here comes a stranger to step into his boots, including looks like his girl." "Watch your mouth," Ethan said quietly, around the child. "She don't know what cold means yet." Pruitt's grin had no kindness in it. "But she will. And when she finds out you've been riding her around the valley while her papa's in the ground 3 weeks, when she finds out you knew—" He let it hang. "She'll hate you most of all, mister. More than the town. 'Cause the town never made her any promises about finding out the truth. You did. I heard you. On the road. Carrie's sound does out here." It landed exactly where the young man aimed it. Ethan kept his face still, but it landed. "You got a stake in this?" he asked. "Or you just like the sound of your own cruelty?" Pruitt's grin slipped. For just a second, something honest showed under it, something that looked almost like grief. "Tom was my friend," he said low and rough. "Only man here treated me square. And I stood at that round pen and watched a horse kill him, and I couldn't do nothing. So don't you ride up here playing rescuer in his clothes." He turned to go, then turned back, and the next thing came out of him before he could stop it. "And tell that child to guard whatever her papa give her to hold. There's men in this valley been asking real careful what Tom left behind. Real careful. A black coat lawyer came up here not 2 days back asking, 'Dalton, did Tom leave any papers, any effects, anything in writin'?'" His eyes cut to the front of Daisy's dress, to where her hands had drifted, the way they always drifted flat against the deed. "And I'll tell you free, mister, I didn't like the way he asked." Ethan's blood went cold and clear. "Voss came here," if that's his name, smiled the whole time. Pruitt mounted his own horse. "You want my advice, you'll get that child, and whatever she's carrying someplace that ain't a store step in the middle of a town that's already sold its soul to the man asking after it." He reined around. "But you didn't take my advice on staying out of dead men's boots, so I don't reckon you'll take it on this." He rode off, and Ethan stood holding the lead rope of his horse with a child at his hip, and understood that the slow waiting game Voss had been playing had just stopped being slow. They didn't go back to town. Ethan made the decision somewhere on the road in the failing light, with the child dozing against his chest, and one of her hands still pressed over the oilcloth, even in sleep. He took the fork that climbed, instead of the one that dropped, and Daisy woke when the horse's gait changed. "This ain't the way to the steps," she said, instantly alert, instantly afraid. No. He'd promised her no lies, and he meant to keep it even now, even tired, even scared. "Daisy, I got to tell you a true thing, and you're not gonna like it, and I'm gonna tell you anyhow, because you've earned true things." He stopped the horse. He turned her in the saddle so she faced him. "Going back to that step tonight ain't safe. There's a man in town wants something your papa left you, wants it bad. And as long as you sit out front of that store where everybody knows to find you, you're easy for him to reach. You understand me?" Her chin trembled. "But Papa said—" "I know what Papa said." He took both her hands in his, the deed pressed between their palms. "And here's what I think your Papa would say now if he could. I think he'd say, 'Daisy, the waitin's done its job. The waitin' brought you somebody. Now you let that somebody do the next part.'" His voice nearly broke, and he held it together for her. "I can't make you trust me. Trust ain't a thing you can hand a person like a plate of stew. You got to decide it. But I'm asking you to decide it. Tonight. Right here. Because the safest place in this whole valley for you to be is wherever I'm standing, and I am asking you to let me stand between you and that man." She looked at him in the near-dark 7 years old. The deed warm between their hands. Everything her father had ever told her about waiting, pulling her one way and the whole of these 2 days pulling her the other. "You won't leave," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a test. "Everybody leaves. My papa left. You'll leave too. You're a man with a horse, and you'll just ride off some mornin', and I'll be sittin' someplace new, waitin' on you, 'stead of him." The words went into Ethan like a blade, because they were the exact words he'd said to himself in the loft. The exact fear turned around and aimed back at him out of the mouth of a child who'd already lost everything once. "I have left," he said. He'd never told a soul. He told her. "Every place I ever stopped these 4 years past I left. Had a wife once. Had a boy of my own about half again your age. Fever took 'em both one winter, and I buried 'em with my own hands, and I ran from that grave, and I've been running ever since. Every town I come to the second it starts to feel like a place I might stay, I saddle up at dawn, and I go." He held her hands tighter. "You read me right, Daisy Harper. You read me dead right. I am a man who leaves." She stared at him, betrayed, already bracing for it. "But I ain't left yet," he said. "I'm still here. And every hour I'm still here is an hour I chose you over the runnin'. And I'm gonna keep choosin' it, hour by hour. I ain't gonna promise you forever, because forever's a thing men promise easy and keep hard, and you've had enough of promises kept hard." His voice steadied into something like iron. "So I'll promise you small and true instead. I'll promise you tonight. I'll get you someplace safe, and I'll sit outside the door of it all night long, and in the morning, I'll still be there, and then I'll promise you that day. And we'll just keep stacking up days like that, you and me, till one morning you wake up and don't even think to wonder if I'm gone, because you'll know. That's how trust gets built. Not all at once, a day at a time." He paused. "Will you let me build it?" The child was quiet for a long while. The horse shifted under them. Then Daisy Harper did something she had not done in 17 days, not when she was hungry, not when Brennan swept dirt at her shoes, not when the same boots passed her every morning and the same eyes looked away every evening. She turned around in the saddle, and she leaned back against his chest, and she let go of the deed with one hand so she could hold onto his arm instead. And she said, "Okay, tonight." "Tonight?" Ethan agreed and turned the horse up the climbing road toward Dalton's, toward the empty cabin at the bottom of the home pasture, toward the thing he'd sworn he'd never let himself have again. And behind them, 8 miles down the valley, a lamp burned late in an office above the bank, where a man in black wool sat with a county map and a column of figures and a letter from a judge in Cheyenne, and waited patient as a spider for a forgotten child to stay. Forgotten just a few weeks more. He did not yet know she'd stopped sitting on the step. He did not yet know a drifter had stopped walking. But Cole Pruitt had told the truth about one thing: sound carries out here in the wide country. And word of a stranger who'd ridden up to Dalton's holding Tom Harper's girl, asking Tom Harper's questions, was already making its slow way back down the valley in the dark, toward the lamp, toward the man, toward the patient, and terrible attention of Harlan Voss. The empty cabin sat dark at the bottom of the home pasture, and Ethan carried the child to it, asleep against his shoulder, her fist still curled tight over the oilcloth, even in the deep of her dreaming. He laid her on the cot and pulled a horse blanket over her and stood looking down at her a while in the dark, and then he did what he'd promised. He dragged the one chair to the door, and he set it square in the gap, and he sat down in it with his rifle across his knees and his back to the wall, and his face to the night, and he kept the watch. Cole Pruitt found him there an hour past midnight. "Thought you might have run already," Pruitt said from the dark. He had a lantern hooded down to a sliver and a bedroll under his arm. "Most men would have. Easier than what you signed up for." "I ain't signed up for nothing yet. You're sitting in a chair in a doorway with a Winchester guard and a sleeping kid at 1 in the morning. Pruitt let the lantern up a notch so Ethan could see his face. The cruelty was gone out of it. What was left looked tired and young. "You signed up. You just don't want to say the words out loud, 'cause saying 'em makes it real." Ethan said nothing, which was an answer. Pruitt set his bedroll down against the cabin wall a few feet off, and lowered himself onto it with his own rifle across his knees in an unspoken mirror of the man in the chair. "I'll take the second half the night," he said. "You'll be no good to her nodding off at dawn." "Why?" "'Cause I owe Tom Harper a debt I can't pay him direct no more." Pruitt looked out at the dark. "And 'cause I called you a vulture this afternoon, and a man what sits up all night with a rifle ain't a vulture. Vultures wait for the dyin' to finish. They don't stand between." He spat to the side. "I was wrong about you. Don't go getting a swelled head. I'm wrong about most things, but I was wrong about that." They sat the watch together, the two of them, and didn't talk much, and the talk they did have came slow and low, so as not to wake the child. "You said a lawyer came up here," Ethan said after a while. "Voss, askin' after Tom's papers. 2 days back. Smiled the whole time like I told you." Pruitt's jaw tightened. Asked Dalton real polite could he look through Tom's effects. Said he was settling the estate as a kindness. Dalton told him Tom didn't have no estate, but a saddle and a change of clothes and $40 in back wages, and the lawyer's smile got a little thin, and he asked, "Was there anything in writing? Any documents? Any deeds?" Pruitt looked sideways at the sleeping child. "I didn't say nothin', but I'd seen Tom the night before that horse killed him sittin' on the corral fence, wrappin' something in oilcloth by lantern light, careful as a man wraps a newborn. And I'd heard him tell another hand he'd given his girl something to hold worth more than the whole town." He looked back at Ethan. "So, when that lawyer asked about deeds, I knew exactly what he was after. And I knew exactly where it was. tied up in a little girl's dress on a store step in Ridgewater. And you didn't tell him. I'd sooner cut my own tongue. Pruitt's voice went hard. But here's the thing'll keep you up nights, mister. I wasn't the only hand standing there. And not every man on this place owes Tom Harper a debt. Some of 'em owe Harlan Voss money. He let that land. Word that the girl's carrying the paper, it's loose now. I can feel it. It's moving. And once it gets to Voss, he ain't gonna wait on no court no more. Why would he? He don't need the law to declare her abandoned and the claim forfeit if he can just take the paper off a child and burn it. No deed, no claim. No claim, the land reverts, and he files first. Pruitt shook his head slow. That's what changed today. Before today, he had time on his side. He could afford to be patient. Now he knows the paper exists, and he knows a stranger's sniffing around it. Patience just got expensive for him. Ethan sat very still in the doorway, with the rifle across his knees, and the child breathing soft behind him, and felt the whole game tilt under him into something faster and meaner than it had been that morning. How long? He said. Before he moves. Pruitt considered it. Day. 2. He'll want it done quiet. A man like that don't like noise. He'll send someone polite first, a paper, a summons, something with a seal on it to make it look like law. And if the paper don't pry her loose from you, then he'll send someone who ain't polite. Pruitt's eyes glinted in the lantern light. You best decide tonight, mister, what kind of man you're gonna be when the polite one comes, because there won't be time to decide once he's standing in front of you. Ha-paw. The polite one came at noon the next day. Ethan had spent the morning learning the shape of the thing he'd taken on, and it was harder than any horse. Daisy woke before dawn with a cry caught in her throat, sitting bolt upright on the cot, hands flying to her chest to check the deed was still there, eyes wild and not seeing him. Easy, he said from the doorway. Easy, Daisy. It's morning. I'm right here, same as I said. She stared at him a long moment, the panic draining slow. You stayed. Told you I would. You said you was a man who leaves. I said I ain't left yet. He set the rifle aside and came to crouch by the cot. And here it is mornin', and I'm still here, so that's one day I owe you and one day I paid. Yesterday I promised you tonight. Now I'm promising you today. You want eggs? Pruitt says there's hens. She didn't smile. She wasn't ready to smile. But she nodded, and she got up, and she followed him out into the morning, keeping him always between herself and the open country, the way a chick keeps to the hen. And Ethan understood that trust in a child, this broke, didn't arrive in one piece. It came in slivers. He'd collect the slivers. By mid-morning he'd struck the bargain with Dalton Plain. The cabin, the job. The greenstock, he'd take all of it, not because he wanted the staying, but because the staying was the only roof he could put over the child while he fought for her. Dalton shook his hand and held it an extra beat. Tom would have liked you, the old rancher said. He didn't like many. I ain't doing it to be liked. No, Dalton said. I don't reckon you are. That's the part he'd have liked. And then at noon, the polite one came. He rode in on a gray gelding far too good for him. A soft-handed clerk in a clean coat with a leather folder and a tin star pinned crooked to his vest. A deputy's star. Brand new, the kind a man gets handed rather than earns. He drew up at the corral where Ethan was working a young horse on a long line, and he sat his saddle and waited to be noticed the way men do when they think a paper in their pocket makes them tall. You'd be the drifter, the clerk said. Walker. I'd be Walker. Ethan didn't stop working the colt. Drifter's your word. I'm Deputy Marsh, out of Ridgewater. Marsh patted the leather folder. I'm here on a legal matter concerning a minor child, Daisy Harper. It's come to the county's attention that she's being held by a man with no lawful claim to her. That's a serious thing, Mr. Walker. That's near to abduction. Ethan brought the colt to a stop easy and let the long line go slack and turned to face the man on the gray. Abduction, he said. The law's particular about who has charge of orphan children. Marsh opened the folder and produced a document heavy with seals and a judge's flourish. This here's an order from the Circuit Court at Cheyenne, signed by Judge Aldous Crane, appointing a guardian ad litem for the minor Daisy Harper, and directing that she be placed into the custody of said guardian pending her transfer to the county home. He held it out. The guardian appointed is Mr. Harlan Voss of Ridgewater, a respectable man, so you'll hand the child over to me and I'll see her safe to him, and there'll be no more talk of abduction. The colt blew and sidled. Ethan stood quiet, reading the man more than the paper. Judge signed that, he said. Crane. He did. Funny. Ethan walked to the corral rail unhurried, and the clerk's gray shied a step at his coming. Sheriff Cole told me yesterday there weren't no statute on the books made a town love a child it didn't want. Now today there's a circuit judge 200 miles off who's heard so much about little Daisy Harper, he's gone and appointed her a guardian special. That's a powerful lot of legal attention to land on one little girl in one single day. He set his hand on the rail. Almost like somebody wired Cheyenne in a hurry. Almost like somebody's in a sudden rush. Marsh's jaw tightened. The court's reasons ain't yours to question. They're exactly mine to question. Ethan's voice never rose. It got quieter, which in him was the dangerous direction. Let me see the paper. Marsh hesitated, then leaned down and let him take it. Ethan read it slow and careful, every line the way he'd read the deed. And when he was done, he looked up, and there was something cold and certain in his face. Now, the look of a man who's found the loose nail that brings the whole fence down. This order names the child a minor with no living parent and no property, Ethan said. No property. It says so right here plain. Said minor being without estate or means. He tapped the line. Now why would a guardian get appointed special by a judge 200 miles off on a girl who's got no property? Guardians cost money. Courts don't appoint 'em out of Christian charity. They appoint 'em when there's something to manage. He handed the paper back. And the one man in this territory who knows there's something to manage, who knows this child's holding a deed to the only year-round water in this end of the valley, is the same man this paper just made her guardian. He looked at Marsh steady. Voss didn't get appointed to protect that child. He got appointed to get legal control of her so he can get legal control of what she's carrying. And he wrote no property right on the order so that when the deed turns up missin' later, there won't be nothing on record saying she ever had any. Marsh had gone pale. You can't make accusations like that against... I ain't making accusations. I'm reading you the paper. The paper makes the accusation. The paper says no property about a child standing on a quarter section worth a fortune in water. Ethan stepped back from the rail. Take it back to Voss. Tell him I read it. Tell him I can read real good. And tell him the child stays where she is. You're refusing a court order. Marsh's voice cracked up high. You'll hang for it. That's defying the law. That's defying a forged-up writ a crooked judge signed for a land thief, Ethan said. And I'll take my chances with what's lawful and what's just legal. There's a difference, son. Your boss has spent his whole life making the second one do the work of the first. But they ain't the same thing, and out here 8 miles from his bank with a rifle in that cabin and a man behind it who's got nothing left to lose, the difference matters again. He pointed up the road. Ride. Marsh rode. He near put the spurs through the gray getting out of that yard. Sing. But the staying child had heard. She was standing in the cabin doorway when Ethan turned, and how much she'd caught he couldn't say, but it was enough. Her face had gone white and fixed, both hands pressed flat over the deed, and her eyes were on him with a terrible new question forming behind them. That man said... She started and stopped. Started again. That man said I got no parent. He said minor without no parent. What's that mean? Ethan crossed the yard slow. He'd known this was coming. He'd known it since the road 2 nights back. There are silences a man can hold, and silences that finally crush him, and this one had run its course. Daisy, he said, and went down on one knee in the dirt in front of her the way he had on the steps, the way he kept finding himself going down for her. I need you to listen to me real careful now, and I need you to remember that everything I'm fixin' to say, I'm sayin' it true. I told you I'd tell you no lies, and I ain't told you one yet, and I ain't gonna start now, even though what I got to say is the hardest true thing in the world. Her hands pressed harder against her chest. Where's my papa? It came out small and flat and already breaking. You said you'd find out, at the ranch. You said we'd ask straight. And Mr. Dalton said grown-up trouble. He said Papa had to go a ways off. But that man, that deputy, he said no parent. Her breath was coming quick now in little hitches. Which is it? Which is true? You said no lies. So which is true? And Ethan Cole Walker, who had buried his own wife and his own boy with his own hands and run from the graves for 4 years, looked into the face of a 7-year-old child who'd waited 17 days on a step for a man who was never coming, and he found he could not run from this one. Not from her. Not from the asking. Your papa, he said, and his voice came out rough and low and unbearably gentle. Loved you more than he loved his own life. I know that even though I never met him because of what he did. A man wraps a deed in oilcloth and trusts it to his little girl. Instead of any bank or any neighbor, that's a man who knew his girl was the strongest, truest thing he had in this world. He left you the most precious thing he owned because he knew you'd guard it. And you did. 17 days you guarded it. He was right about you, Daisy. He was right about everything except one. Except what? Barely a whisper. He thought he was coming back. Ethan took her small hands gently easing them off her chest to hold them in his own. He never wanted to leave you on that step, sweetheart. He meant to come for you. He told you wait because he meant it. But something happened up at that ranch that he couldn't help and couldn't stop, and it was nobody's fault, and it was the cruelest kind of accident, and it took him before he could keep his promise to you. His own eyes had gone wet now, and he let them because she'd earned his truth, in every form, even this one. Your papa's gone, Daisy. He died. 3 weeks back up at Dalton's doing the hard work he took on so he could keep that land safe for you. He didn't leave you because he wanted to. He left you because God took him, and there wasn't a thing in heaven or earth he could have done about it. He was coming back. He just couldn't. The child stood absolutely still. For one long, terrible moment, she didn't move at all, didn't breathe, and Ethan saw the whole architecture of 17 days of hope hang suspended in her small body, like a struck thing that hasn't yet learned its falling. And then it fell. Daisy didn't scream. He'd half expected screaming and braced for it, but she didn't scream. She just made a sound he'd never heard a child make, a low, broken sound that came up from somewhere far under words, and her knees went out from under her, and Ethan caught her before she hit the ground and gathered her up against his chest, all of her, the deed and the dress and the small shaking body, and held on. I waited. She said into his shirt over and over, the words coming apart. I waited just like he said. I didn't move. I didn't take one step off the boards. I waited. I waited. I know you did. He held her tighter and rocked her there in the dirt of the yard, this man who'd sworn never again to hold something he could lose, holding the thing he could least afford to lose, knowing it, doing it anyway. I know. You waited braver than anybody ever waited for anything. He'd be so proud. Daisy, he'd be so proud of you. Then why didn't he come? Her voice broke clean in half. If I was good, if I waited, why didn't he come? Because he couldn't, baby. Not because of you. Never because of you. You did everything right. The world just... His own voice failed and he pushed through it. The world just took him anyhow. The world does that sometimes to the people we love most, and it ain't fair, and it ain't your fault, and there ain't no waiting good enough to undo it. I know it firsthand. I waited on people too. They didn't come back neither. She cried then finally, the real crying, the kind that had been dammed up behind 17 days of being strong, and Ethan knelt in the dirt and held her through every wave of it, and didn't tell her to hush, and didn't tell her it was all right, because it wasn't all right. And she was too smart and too hurt to be told a comfortable lie, and he'd promised her none. From the corral rail, Cole Pruitt watched with his hat off and his throat working, and finally turned away, because some things a man oughtn't to be watched grieving. It was a long time before her crying eased into the deep, shuddering quiet that comes after. The sun had moved. Ethan's knees had gone numb against the ground, and he hadn't shifted them not once. What happens to me now? she said at last, horse still pressed to his chest. I got no papa. The deputy said the county home. He said a guardian's taken me. That man, the one in town. No. Ethan said it without an instant's hesitation, and the certainty in it was a thing she could lean on, and he felt her lean. That man ain't taking you anywhere. I'm gonna stop him. I don't yet know the whole of how, but I know I'm gonna, and I want you to hear me promise it. He drew back enough to look in her swollen eyes. Daisy Harper, I have spent 4 years running from anything that could hurt me by leaving. And I just figured out kneelin' here that I been running the wrong direction the whole time. The thing that hurts ain't the leavin'. The thing that hurts is having something worth staying for and being too scared to stay. He brushed the wet hair off her face. I'm done being too scared. You hear I am done. You waited 17 days for somebody to choose you. Well, somebody's choosing you, right here, right now, in the dirt. I'm choosing you, and I ain't gonna stop choosing you. And the man in town, and his crooked judge, and his whole bought-up town, can come and try to take you, and they'll have to come through me to do it. And I have got nothing left in this world to lose except you, which makes me about the most dangerous man Harlan Voss has ever made an enemy of. The child looked up at him, ruined with grief, emptied out, and something flickered in the wreckage. Not hope, not yet. It was too soon for hope. But the thing that comes before hope, the first faint willingness to believe she might not be facing the world alone. You'll stay, she said. I'll stay. You promise? And then before he could answer, she shook her head against him fierce. No, don't promise. Everybody promises. Papa promised. Just... She gripped a fistful of his shirt. Just don't leave. Don't say it. Just don't do it. Ethan understood. He understood completely. Promises had failed this child every way a promise could fail. Words were spent currency to her now. So he didn't promise. He just stood up with her in his arms, all of her, and carried her into the cabin out of the heat. And that act said the thing better than any words could have. A man does not pick up a burden and carry it into shelter unless he means to keep carrying it. And as he ducked through the doorway with the grieving child against his shoulder, he heard hoofbeats on the road. Not the single gray gelding of the clerk this time, but 2 horses, 3 coming fast and hard up the valley from the direction of town. And he turned in the doorway to look, and Cole Pruitt was already running for the cabin with his rifle, his face gone tight, calling out a single word that turned the warm afternoon to ice. Riders. Riders. Ethan was inside the cabin and had the door barred, and the child down behind the heavy oak table before Pruitt finished the word. He moved without thinking, the way a man moves when his body has done a thing before, and his mind catches up after. And his mind catching up told him that the thing his body remembered was not protecting his own. His own he had failed to protect. His own were in the ground. This was a second chance the world had no business handing him, and he would not fail it twice. Stay down, he told Daisy. Hands over your ears if it gets loud. You don't get up, you don't run, you don't do nothing but stay small and stay put whatever you hear. Can you do that for me? She nodded white-faced, the grief in her shoved aside by a child's clean animal fear. Good girl. He jacked around into the Winchester and put his eye to the gap in the shutter. 3 riders. He counted them and read them the way he read everything. The first was Marsh, the soft clerk sitting his gray well back, wanting plainly to be anywhere else. The second was a stranger big through the shoulders, with a low-slung gun rig and the loose easy seat of a man who'd used it. The third rode in the center, and a little ahead, in black wool that the heat could not touch on a horse that had never known a hard day, and he came on at a walk. Not a charge. A walk. Harlan Voss had never charged at anything in his life. He let other men charge and arrived after to collect. That's him, Ethan said low, the lawyer his own self. He didn't send the unpolite man, he came with him. Pruitt was at the other shutter rifle up. Then it's gone past patient. A man like Voss don't ride out personal, unless he means to settle it personal. He worked his jaw. That big one in the middle, I know him. Name's Briggs. Voss keeps him on for collections. The kind of collections don't go through no bank. He glanced at Ethan. He's killed men. 2 I know of. Both rulin' accidents, both witnesses gone quiet after. Then we don't give him an accident to work with. Voss drew rein in the middle of the yard, a careful 30 feet from the cabin door, well out of any honest pistol range, and he sat there a moment, letting the silence do its work. Then he raised his voice, and it carried smooth and pleasant across the dust. Mr. Walker, I believe you've already met Deputy Marsh. I thought I'd come myself to spare us both any further misunderstanding. A pause, gracious as a host's. There needn't be any unpleasantness here. I've come for the child, and I've come with the law, and I've come, I'll have you know, prepared to be generous about a situation that another man might treat as a hanging matter. Generous. Ethan didn't open the door. He spoke through the gap. That's a fine word out of the man who let her starve 17 days to make her look abandoned for a judge. A small silence. When Voss spoke again, the pleasantness had thinned by a hair. You've been busy with your theories. Ain't theories, it's arithmetic. Ethan kept his voice level and let it carry because some of this was for Voss, and some of it was for the soft clerk who didn't want to be there, and some of it, the most of it, was for whatever scrap of conscience still lived in the valley. Tom Harper filed on the only year-round spring in the upper Sweetwater. You wanted it. You moved your fence, you bought a survey, you broke him in a court you own, and still he wouldn't sell 'cause he was saving it for his girl. So you waited on him the way you wait on everything. And then a green horse did your waiting for you, and Tom Harper was dead, and the only thing between you and that water was a 7-year-old who didn't know her papa was gone. He paused. And you left her on a step. You could have put her in the county home that first day decent and quick. But a child in a home in Cheyenne has a record. A claim filed, a name on a list. So instead, you left her sitting out front of Brennan's store, looking more abandoned and more forgotten every single day, building your case for the judge, one hungry morning at a time. You didn't neglect that child by accident, Voss. You neglected her on a schedule. The big man Briggs shifted in his saddle. Marsh, the clerk, had gone the color of ash. That's a great deal of imagination, Voss said, for a saddle tramp. It's a great deal of truth, Ethan said, for a thief. And here's the rest of it. She's carrying the deed. You know she is. That's why you rode up to Dalton's 2 days back asking after Tom's papers, and that's why your fake guardian writ says she's got no property on it, so when the deed disappears, there won't be a scrap of record saying it ever existed. You don't want to guard this child. You want to get her alone long enough to take a folded-up piece of oilcloth off her and feed it to a fire. That's your whole plan. That's the entire miserable size of it. Burn a dead man's last gift to his daughter so you can steal her water. When Voss spoke this time, all the warmth was gone, and what was left was cold and flat, and for the first time true. You think the deed matters? A thin laugh. How quaint. Let me educate you, Mr. Walker, since you fancy yourself a reader of papers. That deed was filed when Tom Harper was already in arrears to my bank for the court costs he never paid. I hold a lien against everything he owned recorded and lawful predating his little trust arrangement. The deed in that child's dress isn't worth the oilcloth it's wrapped in. The land was mine the day he died by operation of law. I don't need to burn anything. The pleasantness came back worse now for what it covered. I came for the deed only because I am a tidy man, and I dislike loose ends. And I came for the child because the court has made her my ward, and I mean to do my Christian duty by placing her where orphans belong. Behind the table, Daisy made a small sound. Ethan didn't dare look back at her. You're lying, he called. If the law already give you the land, you wouldn't have spent 2 weeks starving her on a step. You'd have shipped her off day one and filed your lien clean. The only reason to leave her where everybody could see her not being claimed is 'cause your lien ain't as clean as you say, and you needed the abandonment to paper over a crack in it. He'd thrown it out as a gamble, a red of the man's face he couldn't see, and he knew the instant the silence stretched a half-beat too long that the bluff had struck bone. Open the door, Mr. Walker, Voss said, and now there was iron under the silk. Send out the child. This is your last chance to do so as a man cooperating with a court order rather than as a corpse who resisted one. No, that was when the fourth horse came. Not from the road. From the high pasture behind the cabin, downhill and fast. And the man on it was old and gray at the temples, with a star on his chest, and he came around the corner of the corral at a hard lope and put his horse square between the cabin and the three riders before anyone had time to do more than turn. Sheriff Ezra Cole. Pruitt had sent a boy to town at first light. Ethan hadn't known. He found out now with the rest of them. "That's far enough, Harlan," Ezra said, and his tired voice had something in it Ethan hadn't heard there before, the sound of a man who has finally, after long cowardice, decided to spend himself. "Marsh, get that hand off your gun. Briggs, you so much as breathe wrong, and I'll take it as the assault it's dressed up to be." "Sheriff?" Voss turned to him, smooth as oil. "You're interfering with the lawful service of a court order. I'd remind you whose recommendation put that star on your chest. You would." Ezra didn't move his horse. "And I've been remembering it every day for 6 years, every time I looked the other way. Looked away from the fence you moved. Looked away from the survey you bought. Looked away from a little girl on a store step." His jaw set. "I'm done looking away. I read your writ this morning, Harlan, the copy Marsh left at my office, and Walker's right about every word of it. No property. On Tom Harper's girl." He shook his head slow. "I knew Tom. I knew what he had. And the day a judge 200 miles off tells me a Harper's got no property when I can ride to the courthouse here and pull the recorded deed myself is the day I stop taking that judge's paper as gospel. The deed is subordinate to my lien. Then prove it." Ezra's voice cracked like a whip. "In open court. Here. With the recorded papers on the table, and the girl represented by somebody who ain't you. If your lien's so clean, Harlan, you got nothing to fear from daylight." He paused, and the next words came out heavy. "But you're afeard of daylight. You always have been. Everything you've ever taken, you've taken in the quiet, in the dark, with a paper nobody reads till it's too late. So no. You ain't taken that child into the quiet. Not while I wear this." For a long moment, the yard hung on a knife's edge. The big man Briggs had his hand near his gun and his eyes on the sheriff, measuring, and Ethan, watching through the shutter, slid the Winchester's barrel a quiet inch through the gap and put the front sight on the center of Briggs's chest and waited, breathing slow. And it was Marsh, the soft clerk, who broke it. "I won't," he said suddenly, high and shaking. "Mr. Voss, I won't be a party to. He read me that writ, the no property. I didn't think on it before, but he's right. That's fraud on the court. That's a forged representation, and I signed the service return. My name's on it." He was fumbling the tin star off his vest with trembling fingers. "I won't hang for your land. I won't. Find another man." He dropped the star in the dirt and hauled his gray around and rode and didn't look back. And the sound of him going was the sound of Harlan Voss's careful machine throwing its first thrown bolt. "Get kid." Voss watched the clerk go without expression. Then he turned back, and when he looked at the cabin, at the gun barrel in the shutter gap, at the sheriff's planted horse, something in his face had recalculated. He was a man of arithmetic, too, and the numbers had moved. "Briggs," he said quietly, "we're leaving." The big man blinked. "Just like that, we got him. We have a sheriff, an armed man in a fortified position, and a witness who just rode off to think about his immortal soul." Voss gathered his reins, calm as a man leaving a dinner that's run late. "I don't fight battles, Mr. Briggs. I win wars. And wars are won in courtrooms and county records, not in dooryards." He looked once more at the cabin and raised his voice a final time, pleasant again, the silk laid back over the iron. "Mr. Walker, you've won an afternoon. Enjoy it. But understand what you've actually done. You've made yourself a party to this. You've taken custody of a ward against a court order. You've harbored property in dispute. When this reaches the courtroom, and it won't be a sad little orphan against a respectable man. It'll be a known drifter with no fixed home, no kin, no character, and a dead wife and child he abandoned the graves of. Ethan flinched hard behind the shutter. The man had done his own arithmetic on him, too, standing up to explain to a judge why he stole a minor and a fortune both. Think on how that reads. Think on it long. He turned his horse. I'll see you in Cheyenne. And he rode out at a walk the way he'd come, the big man trailing him. And the dust of them hung gold in the afternoon, and slowly settled, and the yard was quiet, and the sheriff let out a breath that seemed to take 10 years with it. So, Ethan didn't lower the rifle until they were small on the road. Then he unbarred the door and came out into the yard, and Ezra got down off his horse, stiff and old, and the two men looked at each other. You sent for him, Ethan said to Pruitt, who'd come around the cabin. Town. Sent a boy at dawn. Pruitt shrugged, not quite meeting his eye. Figured the law ought to be on the right side of this for once, even if it took some shaman to get it there. It took more'n shaman. Ezra lowered himself onto the cabin step and took off his hat and held it in both hands and looked at it. It took 6 years, and a little girl I let sit on a storeboard while I told myself it weren't my business. I'm too old to keep paying for my own quiet. So, he looked up. I'll stand for her Walker, in court. I'll testify to what I know, the fence, the survey, the deed I can pull from the recorder's office myself. It won't be easy. Voss owns the local bench, which is why he'll move it to Cheyenne to a judge he's bought. But a bought judge in open court, with a sheriff testifying to fraud and a recorded deed on the table, is a different thing than a paper signed in the dark. He paused. It's a fightin' chance. It ain't a sure thing. I won't lie to you that it is. Don't, Ethan said. She's heard enough sure things that wasn't. He went inside. Daisy had come out from behind the table and was standing in the middle of the room with the deed clutched in both hands, and her eyes enormous, and she'd heard all of it. The fence, the survey, the lien, the abandonment on a schedule, a dead wife and child he abandoned the graves of. She'd heard the man in black say, her papa's last gift to her wasn't worth the cloth it was wrapped in. She'd heard a stranger's whole life laid out as a thing to be used against her. Is it true? She said. What he said about the paper, that it ain't worth nothin'. Her chin was trembling, but her voice held fierce. Papa said it was worth more than the whole town. Was Papa wrong? Is it just cloth? Ethan crossed to her and went down on his knee the way he always did, and he took the oilcloth bundle between his hands without taking it from hers, so they held it together. Your papa was not wrong, he said. That man wants you to think the paper's worthless, so you'll stop guardin' it. That's the oldest trick there is. Make a body believe the treasure they're holdin' ain't worth holdin', so they'll set it down where you can grab it. But you listen to me, Daisy Harper. That paper is worth so much that a rich man rode out here personal with a hired gun and a bought judge to try and get it off a 7-year-old. Men don't do that for cloth. They do it for the most valuable thing in the valley. Your papa knew exactly what it was worth. That's why he trusted it to the strongest, bravest person he knew. He pressed her small hands tighter around it. You. He trusted it to you, and you've kept it safe through more than most grown men could have stood. So you keep right on guarding it, because it's real and it's yours, and we are going to make a court of law say so out loud. She looked at the bundle in their joined hands, then up at him. And the question that came next was the one he'd been dreading more than Briggs's gun. He said something about you, she whispered. The man. He said you had a wife and a child, and you left their graves. Her wet eyes searched his face. You had a little girl too, or a boy, and they died, and you ran away from where they're buried. The yard outside had gone quiet. Pruitt and the sheriff had stayed out, giving them the room. Ethan was silent a long moment. He had never spoken of it to a living soul before 2 nights ago in the saddle, and he'd given her only the bones of it then. Now the child was asking for the whole of it, and he understood that this was the price of all his demanding that she face hard, true things. The reckoning ran both directions. He could not ask a 7-year-old to look her grief in the eye and then refuse to look at his own in front of her. A boy, he said finally, very low. His name was Samuel. He was 10, and my wife was Ruth. He had to stop. He made himself go on. A fever came through one winter. The kind that takes a whole valley takes the young and the old first. Took Samuel in 3 days. Ruth nursed him to the end, and the fever took her right after, like it was waiting for her to finish so it could finish her. His voice had gone to gravel. I buried him myself. Ground was froze near solid, and I had to thaw it with fires and chip it out 2 days a grave, and the whole time I kept thinking I should have been able to do something, a husband, a father, and there weren't a single thing I could do but dig. He looked down at their joined hands on the deed. And when it was done, I couldn't stay. Couldn't look at that cabin. Couldn't look at his little boots by the door or her shawl on the peg. So I saddled up and I rode, and I told myself I'd never again hold something close enough that losing it could do that to me twice. His eyes came up to hers, and they were not a strong man's eyes. Now they were just a man's. So yes, Daisy, he was right about that part. I did run from their graves. I've been running 4 years. That man knows it, 'cause men like him collect a person's wounds the way some men collect debts to spend later when it'll hurt the most. The child was quiet, and then she did a thing that undid him completely. She let go of the deed with one hand, the deed she had not let go of for anyone for 17 days. The most precious thing she owned, and she reached up and put that small hand flat against the side of his rough, wet face, the way a body comforts another body, the way her papa must once have comforted her. "I'm sorry about Samuel," she said, "and about Ruth." A pause, the child working it out in her own way, the only way she had. "Maybe that's why God put you on the step where I was. 'Cause you knew how it feels, to wait on somebody who can't come." Her voice wavered. "Nobody else in that whole town knew how it feels. But you did, so you stopped." And Ethan Cole Walker, who had not wept at his own graves, because the work of digging them had used up all the weeping in him, put his head down against the shoulder of a 7-year-old orphan and wept. Now, finally, 4 years late, while she patted his back with her one free hand, and held her dead father's deed in the other, and said, "It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to run no more. I'm not gonna leave neither two broken people in an empty cabin, each one somehow impossibly." The answer to the other's grief. Chapir. The sun was low when he came back out, his face washed at the trough, his voice his own again. Ezra and Pruitt rose from where they'd been waiting. "Cheyenne," Ethan said. "When?" "He'll move fast now." The sheriff settled his hat. "His clerk ran off, his afternoon ambush failed, and he knows we'll be pulling the recorded deed. He'll want it in front of his judge before we can build more than we have. A week, maybe less." He hesitated. "Walker. I got to say it plain. Voss wasn't bluffing about how it'll read. You against him in a Cheyenne courtroom, a man with no home, no kin, a stranger to that bench with a hired judge against you. The odds ain't good. The deed helps. My testimony helps. But he'll paint you as exactly what you've been these 4 years, a drifter, a man who runs, a man who abandons what he loves." His old eyes were steady and sorry. "And the cruelest part is he won't even have to lie to do it. He'll just have to say true things about your past in a courtroom and let him do his work." Ethan looked out at the road where the dust had long since settled toward the town, toward Cheyenne. 200 miles past it, toward a bought judge and a clean lie, and his own true history, waiting to be turned into a weapon against the child sleeping behind him. "Let him say 'em," Ethan said. "Let him stand up and tell that whole courtroom that I'm a man who runs from what he loves." His jaw set, and something in his weathered face had changed for good, had finished changing in an empty cabin with a small hand against his cheek. "And then I'll stand up after him. And I'll point at that little girl. And I'll let the whole court see who didn't run." They had 6 days, and Ethan spent every one of them building a case, the way another man might build a barn, plank by plank, nail by nail, sleeping little and trusting nothing he hadn't checked twice. The first day he rode to the county recorder's office with Ezra, and they pulled the book, and there it was written in the clerk's own hand and stamped with the territorial seal. The Harper claim filed 8 years past. The spring marked the description, matching the deed in the child's dress to the letter. and 3 pages on the lien Voss claimed real recorded dated. But Ezra ran his thumb down the column of dates and went still. "Look here," the sheriff said. "His liens recorded the 14th of March, year before last. So Harper's trust deed, the one making it Daisy's, that's recorded the 2nd of March, 12 days before." Ezra looked up slow. "Voss told you to your face his lien came first, predated the trust. Said the land was his by operation of law the day Tom died." He tapped the book. "It's a lie, Walker. It's a recorded, datable, black and white lie. The trust came first. The child's claim is senior to his lien by 12 days. Whatever Tom owed him, it don't reach the land he'd already put in trust for his girl before the lien ever existed." Ethan stared at the 2 dates, the whole towering threat of Harlan Voss suddenly resting on 12 days of ink, and felt something he hadn't let himself feel since the man rode into that dooryard. Not hope. He'd learned to distrust hope. But the cold, clean thing that comes before it, the sight of solid ground. "Then we've got him. We've got the truth." Ezra closed the book careful. "Whether we've got him depends on whether the judge will look at the truth. And the judge is his." He let that sit. "Get a certified copy." 2. Voss has friends in this office, and books have been known to lose pages between here and a courtroom. They got 3 copies. Ethan carried one inside his shirt, the way Daisy carried the deed flat against his chest, and never set it down. The second day broke his heart in a smaller way and a worse one. He'd thought, fool that he was, that telling the child the truth about her father was the hard part, and that the grieving would come like a storm and pass like one. It didn't pass. It moved into the cabin and lived there. Daisy didn't cry much anymore. She'd cried herself empty that first afternoon, but the not crying was harder to watch. She went quiet in a way no 7-year-old should know how to go quiet. She ate when told. She answered when asked. And she stopped entirely reaching for things. A child reaches for a cup for a hand for the next thing she wants. Daisy had stopped as if she'd learned that wanting was just the first step toward losing, and she'd decided to skip the wanting and save herself the rest. Ethan watched her sit on the cabin step one morning, the deed in her lap, looking at nothing, and it scared him worse than Voss and Briggs and the whole crooked bench of Cheyenne put together. He sat down beside her. He didn't crowd her. He'd learned that. "You know what I figured out 4 years ago?" he said, looking out at the same nothing she was looking at, "when I was digging those graves." She didn't answer, but she didn't get up either, which was as much as he ever got now. "I figured out that the worst thing about losing somebody ain't the losing. It's the after. It's waking up the next morning and your body don't know yet. Your body reaches for 'em, reaches before you're awake enough to remember, and then you remember, and you have to lose 'em all over again every morning for a long, long time." He paused. "That what's happening to you? You've been reaching for him mornings before you remember." The child's chin crumpled just slightly and she nodded. "Yeah." Ethan nodded too. "Me too. Still. 4 years on some mornings I reach for Samuel before I remember. It gets further apart. It don't ever stop all the way. But it gets further apart, and that's the most anybody can promise you, and I won't promise you more, 'cause I told you no lies." He let a breath out. "But here's the other thing I figured out, and it took me a sight longer. The reachin' ain't a curse, Daisy. The reachin' is the love. Your body reaches 'cause your body loved him so hard it can't believe he's gone. If you stop reachin', if you make yourself stop wantin', so it won't hurt. And I see you doing it. I see you trying to stop wantin' things so you can't lose 'em. Then you don't just lose the hurt. You lose the love along with it. You go hollow." He looked at her. "I went hollow. 4 years hollow. Don't you do it. You keep on reachin' even when it hurts, even when there's nothing there. 'Cause one day, there'll be something there again. And your hand'll be open and ready for it instead of closed up tight." Daisy was quiet a long while. Then she set the deed down on the step beside her. Set it down. The thing she never set down. and she reached over, and she took his big rough hand in both her small ones. And she held it, and she didn't say anything at all. It was the first thing she'd reached for in 3 days. Ethan looked straight ahead, so she wouldn't see his face, and held her hand, and counted it privately as a bigger victory than anything they'd find in any recorder's book.
9代.
The third day, the town began to turn. It started small. Mrs. Abigail Brown drove a buckboard 8 miles out to Dalton's with a basket of bread and a side of bacon and a dress she'd sewn in the night, a proper child's dress in calico blue. And she stood in the yard wringing her hands. "I should have done more," she said to Ethan, not able to look at the cabin where the child was. "First week I brought her bread by night so nobody'd see. By night, like feedin' a child was something to be ashamed of in daylight." Her voice shook. "My own grandbaby's about her age down in Laramie, and I left that little girl on a step and brought her bread in the dark. I'll carry that to my grave." She thrust the basket at him. "I want to testify. In Cheyenne. I want to stand up and say I saw her there 17 days. And I saw Voss's man come round more'n once to make sure she stayed put. Saw him with my own eyes. Twice. A big fella, shoulders like a door. He'd come look at her and ride off. I thought it was strange. I didn't think on why." Her jaw firmed. "I'll say it under oath. He can call my note any day he likes. I don't care no more. I'm done being afraid of that man. He'll padlock your diner. Then I'll bake bread in someone else's kitchen." She put the basket in his hands. "In the daylight, where folks can see." She was the first. She was not the last. Word had a way of moving in that valley, Pruitt had said, and now it moved in the other direction. The story of the drifter who'd stopped, and the deputy who'd thrown down his star rather than serve a lie, and the sheriff who'd planted his horse in a dooryard and told Harlan Voss no for the first time in 6 years. By the 4th day, there were 3 more willing to ride to Cheyenne. By the 5th, there were 7. Not a one of them could meet Daisy's eye, because every one of them had walked past her, and they knew it, and the shame of it was the thing that finally made them brave. Brennan himself didn't come, but Brennan sent something by way of Pruitt that mattered more than his face would have. "Store owner, give me this," Pruitt said, handing over a slip of paper. "Said tell you he won't testify, hasn't the spine, but he'll not see a child robbed by a man he hates worse than he hates his own conscience." It was a record of receipts in Brennan's cramped hand, dates the back of the page he'd torn from his own ledger. It's a list of every day Voss's man Briggs came into the store across them 17 days. Bought a plug of tobacco each time so's to have a reason to be there. Brennan marked the dates 'cause he keeps every sale. There's 11 of them. 11 days out of 17 Voss had a man checking the girl was still on that step. Pruitt looked grim. "That ain't a man neglecting a child by accident, Walker. That's a man posting a guard on his bait." Ethan looked at the list of dates, 11 crosses in a dead man's ledger, and folded it in with the certified copies against his chest and felt the case go from a fighting chance to something with teeth. But he didn't let himself believe it. He'd believed in solid ground before. He'd believed a fever would break. Yeah. On the 5th night, the thing he'd been afraid of since the cabin happened. It came at the worst hour, the dead middle of the night, and it came not as Briggs and a gun, but as a sound, the soft crunch of a boot on the gravel outside, just one where there shouldn't have been any. Ethan was up and at the shutter with the rifle before he'd fully woken that old killed and buried instinct hauling him out of sleep, and he saw a shape moving low along the corral, working toward the cabin, careful. "Pruitt," he breathed. The young hand was already awake on his bedroll, already reaching for his gun. Ethan held up a hand, wait, and watched. The shape reached the corral gate and stopped, and Ethan saw the glint of a lantern hooded almost to nothing, and saw the man crouch by the gate latch and understood. Not the cabin. The horses. He was going for the horses. Cut the gate, scatter the stock across 8 miles of dark range, and Ethan would have no way to get the child and the papers to Cheyenne in time. No theft, no violence, nothing a court could hang on Voss. Just a gate left open, and a man 2 afoot to make his hearing. It was, Ethan thought, with a cold flare of something close to admiration, exactly the kind of thing Voss would think of. Win the war by making sure the other side never reaches the battlefield. He went out the back window without a sound, and came around the cabin low, and he was on the man before the man knew the night had changed the rifle barrel against the back of a neck and a voice in the dark that needed no volume to be terrible. You touch that latch, friend, and I will spread you across this gate. The man froze. The hooded lantern dropped and rolled. Easy, the man said. Easy, mister, I'm just Pruitt. Ethan didn't take his eyes off the man. Light. Pruitt brought the lantern up, and the light fell across a face Ethan didn't know, but Pruitt did, and the young hand's breath hissed out between his teeth. You son of a Hollis! Pruitt's voice shook with fury. You ride for Dalton. You eat at Dalton's table, and Voss bought you to scatter Dalton's own stock in the dark. The man Hollis had gone gray. He's got my note. He said the words tumbling out the way they always tumbled out of Voss's people once the dark stopped protecting them. 40 acres and a mortgage and a sick wife. He said just open the gate, nobody gets hurt. The stock'll wander. He said it ain't even a crime to leave a gate open. He said he'd call my whole note if I didn't. He was nearly weeping. I got young'uns. What was I supposed to do? And there it was again. The same rot at the root of the whole valley. A man with children made cruel to a child by fear for his own. Ethan lowered the rifle. He looked at the trembling man a long moment. You're gonna do something for me, Hollis, he said quietly. You're gonna ride to Cheyenne, and you're gonna stand up in that courtroom, and you're gonna tell that judge exactly what you just told me. That Harlan Voss paid you to scatter the stock so a child couldn't get to her own hearing. That he threatened your note to make you do it. Hollis started shaking his head, terror flooding back, and Ethan cut him off. Listen to me. Either you stand up in the daylight and tell the truth and let that whole courtroom see a man finally crawl out from under Voss's thumb, or you spend the rest of your life knowing you crept up in the dark to help a rich man rob an orphan of the last thing her dead daddy left her. Those are your two roads, Hollis. Pick the one you can live with. Pick the one you'd want your own young'uns to know you picked. The man stood in the lantern light, with the gate latch still untouched at his side, and the whole shape of his life balanced on the answer, and finally, brokenly, he nodded. I'll tell it, he whispered. God forgive me, I'll tell it. In the daylight. He was the eighth witness, and he was the one whose testimony would put Voss not just on the losing side of a land dispute, but on the wrong side of a charge. A judge couldn't wave away witness tampering obstruction, the kind of thing that follows a man even when he owns the bench. Ethan watched him ride off into the dark toward town and thought that's 3 of them now. The clerk, Hollis, Brennan with his list. He spent 20 years buying this valley's silence, and it's all coming uncrossed in a week because one child sat on a step long enough to make everybody who walked past her hate themselves a little. She did that. Not me. She did that just by waiting. The morning they left for Cheyenne, Daisy wouldn't get in the wagon. She stood in the cabin yard in the blue calico dress Abigail had sewn, with the deed pinned now inside the bodice, where Ethan had stitched a pocket for it, so her hands could finally rest. And she stood there, with her boots planted and her face white, and would not move toward the wagon where Ezra waited with the team. Daisy! Ethan crouched. We gotta go, sweetheart. The hearing's day after tomorrow, and it's a long road. What if we lose? It came out flat and hard, the voice of a child who has already lost everything once and knows exactly how it feels and will not be surprised by it twice. What if that judge says, I gotta go to the home in Cheyenne, the county home? What if he gives me to that man? Her hands had found each other and were gripping white. Then I rode all that way just to get took anyhow. And they'll make you leave. He said you stole me. What if the judge believes him and they take you to jail and they take me to the home and I never... Her voice finally cracked. I'd rather stay here. At least here you're still here. You're still here. If we go and we lose, I lose everything all at once. Again. I can't do it again. I can't. It was the truest fear she had laid bare in the yard. And it was Ethan's own fear too, The exact one, and he could not lie to her about it, because he'd promised, and because she'd see straight through it if he tried. "You might be right," he said. She blinked. She'd braced for comfort and gotten honesty, and it stopped her. "We might lose," Ethan said. "I won't tell you we can't. The judge is his. The law gets twisted by men with money more often than it gets used straight. You're old enough now to know that, 'cause life's already taught it to you the hard way. So I won't stand here and promise you we'll win, because that's a promise I can't keep, and I'm done giving you promises I can't keep." He took her gripping hands and gently worked them apart and held them one in each of his. "But here's what I can promise you, and I want you to hear the difference, 'cause it's everything. I can't promise you the ending, but I can promise you who'll be standing next to you the whole way to it, win or lose. In that courtroom holding your hand. If the judge does right, I'll be standing next to you. And if the judge does wrong," his voice didn't waver, "if that judge looks at the truth and chooses the lie and they put me in chains and try to drag you off to that home, then I will fight 'em in the next court, and the court after that. And if I run out of courts, I will come for you, Daisy Harper. Wherever they put you, the same as I'd come for you, if you was my own blood, because somewhere in the last week you got to be exactly that. And I am never gonna stop coming for what's mine. That I can promise. That one's a promise I can keep, because keeping it is the only thing left in this world I care to do." The child stared up at him. "You'd come for me," she said. "Even from the home. Even if we lose. You wouldn't ride off." "I would come for you," Ethan said, "if I had to walk to Cheyenne barefoot and tear that home down board by board with my own 2 hands. I am done running. I told you. The running man you read in me that first night on the road, he died in this cabin with your hand on his face. What's left is a man who comes for his own. And you're my own. You've been my own since I knelt down on Brennan's steps and asked your name." His voice thickened. "So we're going to go to Cheyenne, you and me. And we are going to walk into that courtroom together holding hands, and we are going to make 'em look at us. And whatever they decide, you will not lose me in it. That's the one thing that ain't on the table in that courtroom. Me. I'm not something a judge can take away from you. You understand, win or lose you keep me. I already decided. No court signs off on that one. Just you and me did." And Daisy Harper, who had not willingly moved toward anything in days, who had stopped reaching, who had braced her whole small body against the possibility of one more loss. Daisy let go of his hands and threw both arms around his neck and held on with everything she had. The way she should have been able to hold on to her father, the way she'd waited 17 days for the chance to hold on to someone, and she said into his collar, fierce and muffled, and certain for the first time, "Then let's go make 'em look at us." He carried her to the wagon. She rode the whole first hour with her hand in his. They reached Cheyenne the next evening, the wagon trailing a small column behind it. Now Ezra and Pruitt Abigail Brown, the man Hollis, riding penitent and pale. 3 more from town who'd found their courage late, but found it. They put up at a boarding house near the courthouse, and Ethan sat up that night as he always did in a chair by the door. But this time, he wasn't alone in his sitting. Around midnight, the door across the hall opened, and Ezra came and lowered himself into the other chair with a grunt. And after a while, Pruitt joined them, and then Abigail with coffee, and they sat the watch together, the way Ethan and Pruitt had sat it that first night at the cabin. Except now, there were 5 of them, and then 6. When Hollis crept down, unable to sleep, and they talked low about the morning, about who'd say what about the dates in the recorder's book, and the 11 crosses in Brennan's ledger, and the 12 days between a trust and a lien. "He'll have something we ain't thought of," Ezra warned. "He always does. 20 years being the smartest crook in the territory, he's got a card we ain't seen. Don't none of you get cocky in there tomorrow. The minute you think you've won is the minute Harlan Voss takes your legs out." "Let him have his card," Ethan said. He was looking down the hall toward the room where the child slept. "We've got the truth, and we've got the dates, and we've got 8 people who finally decided to stop being ashamed. And we've got something he ain't got, and ain't never had and can't buy. He looked back at them. We've got something worth losing. Every one of us in this hall tomorrow's got something on the line we love more than we're scared. He's just got money and want. A man'll risk a lot for what he loves. He won't risk near as much for what he merely wants. He stood and stretched and looked once more toward the sleeping child. That's the thing he never figured. He thought the want would always beat the love 'cause it always had. He thought a town that'd sell its soul once would sell it every time. A grim, quiet certainty settled over his weathered face. He's about to find out what happens when a whole valley full of cowards finally meets a thing worth being brave for. The courthouse doors opened at 9 the next morning, and Harlan Voss was already inside, seated at the front in his black wool with 2 lawyers from the territorial capital. Flanking him smooth and expensive, and the judge on the bench, was a heavy red-faced man named Crane, who would not look at the gallery and shuffled his papers like a man who already knew how the day would end and was only waiting to perform it. Ethan walked in with Daisy's hand in his. He felt the whole room turn to look the drifter and the orphan exactly as Voss had wanted them painted, the stranger with no kin and the child with no parent walking up the aisle of a court owned by the man who'd starved her on a step. He felt Voss's eyes on him, pleasant and patient and certain. He felt the bought judge not looking at them. He felt behind him his column of late brave witnesses filing in to fill the gallery. Abigail and Ezra and Pruitt and Hollis and the rest. And he heard the murmur run through the room as people counted them and understood that the saddle tramp had not come alone. He walked Daisy to the front and got her settled and crouched down one last time before it all began. "Whatever happens in here," he said low just for her, "you remember what we settled in that cabin yard. You can't lose me in this room. They can't take that one. Look at me." She looked. "We make 'em look at us. That's all we got to do. We make 'em look at the truth so hard they can't pretend not to see it. Can you sit brave for me like you sat brave on that step? Just a few hours this time. Not 17 days. Just a few hours." "I can sit brave," Daisy whispered. "I know you can." He squeezed her hand. "Bravest person I ever met, bar none." The bailiff called the room to order, and Judge Crane cleared his throat without raising his eyes, and Harlan Voss settled back in his chair with the small, certain smile of a man who has bought every outcome in this building for 20 years and has no earthly reason to believe today will be the day the building stops being his. He was about to learn otherwise. Voss's lawyers went first, and they were good smooth as river stones, and they laid it out exactly as Ethan had known they would. The senior of the two, a silver-haired man named Pemberton, rose and addressed the bench without once raising his voice, and he made it sound less like an argument than a regrettable duty. The minor child, Daisy Harper, he said, had been left without parent or estate upon the unfortunate death of her father, a debtor. The court, in its wisdom, had already appointed a guardian, the Honorable and Charitable Mr. Voss, to see her placed in the county home where orphans of her station were properly cared for. And instead of cooperating, a transient named Walker, a man of no fixed residence, no kin, no property, and no lawful standing whatsoever, had seized the child against a court order and held her by force of arms at a remote ranch, even firing upon a sworn deputy. "We are not here, Your Honor, to try a land matter," Pemberton said, smooth and sorrowful. "We are here because a vagrant has taken a little girl. The land, such as it is encumbered past its worth by my client's lawful and recorded lien. There is nothing to fight over but the welfare of a child, and that child's welfare plainly does not lie with an armed drifter who the record will show abandoned the graves of his own dead family 4 winters past and has not stayed 3 months in one place since." He turned just slightly so the gallery could see his face be kind. "A man who runs from his own buried children, Your Honor, is not a man to be handed a living one." It landed like a blow the way Voss had built it to land, and Ethan felt the gallery flinch, and felt Daisy's hand tighten in his, and felt the old shame rise up his neck, hot and familiar. And he let it rise, and he did not look away from it, because a week in a cabin with a child's hand on his face had taught him the difference between shame that should be hidden and grief that should be carried in the open. Judge Crane finally looked up, and his eyes went not to Walker but to Voss. A quick sideways glance, the glance of a man checking with his master that he'd performed correctly. "Mr. Walker," the judge said heavily, "you are not represented by counsel." "No, sir," Ethan said, standing. "Can't afford counsel. Reckon I'll have to make do with the truth." A thin laugh ran through Voss's table. The judge did not smile. "Then say your piece. Briefly." And Ethan Cole Walker, who had not made a speech in his life, who'd spent 4 years saying as few words as a man could and still be sold, a horse stood up in a bought courtroom with a child's hand in his and made them look. "Mr. Pemberton, there's right about one thing," he began, and his voice was quiet and rough and carried clear to the back wall in the dead silence. "I am a man who ran. 4 years back a fever took my wife Ruth and my boy Samuel, 10 years old, in one hard week, and I buried 'em with my own hands in froze ground. And then I ran from that grave, and I been runnin' ever since. He's right. Every word of that's true. I won't stand here and deny a true thing." He paused. "But I'd ask the court to notice what kind of man stands up and tells you a true thing that shames him against his own interest in open court, and what kind of man." He turned and looked full at Voss. "Recorded a lien on a dead man's land, and then stood in a ranch dooryard and told me to my face. It predated the child's trust when the county recorder's own book says different. That got the room. He heard it move. 'Your Honor,' Ethan said, 'I got here a certified copy of the record. Tom Harper put that quarter section in trust for his daughter on the 2nd of March year before last. And Harlan Voss recorded his lien on the 14th. 12 days after. The trust come first. The child's claim is senior to his lien by 12 days, recorded, stamped, and sealed, and I'll lay it on this bench for the court to read with its own eyes." He held it up. "Mr. Pemberton says there's nothing to fight over 'cause the land's encumbered past its worth. But a man don't ride out personal with a hired gun to take a worthless paper off a 7-year-old. And he don't lie about the dates of his own lien if the land's already lawfully his. He lied because the dates ruin him. He's been lying about those 12 days because those 12 days are the whole game." Pemberton was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is a custody hearing, not a—" "He made it a land matter," Ethan said, "the day he had a judge appoint him guardian over a child he wrote down as having no property, when she's sitting on the most valuable water in the upper Sweetwater. You don't appoint a guardian to manage nothin'. He appointed himself to manage her water, and wrote no property on the order, so when the deed vanished, there'd be no record it ever was. That ain't custody. That's robbery with a court signature on it. Mr. Walker." The judge's voice had gone dangerous. "You are addressing accusations at officers of this—" "I'm addressing the truth at this bench," Ethan said, "and I got 8 people come 200 miles to swear to it. I'd ask the court to let 'em." And before Crane could refuse, Ezra Cole was on his feet in the gallery with his hat in his hand and his star on his chest. "Sheriff Ezra Cole Ridgewater," he said in the voice of a man finally done being afraid. "And I'll swear to every word of it, Your Honor, and add to it. I held my office 6 years on Harlan Voss's recommendation, and I'm ashamed to say it bought my silence for most of 'em. But I pulled that recorder's book with my own hands. The dates are true. And I'll swear to more that I knew Tom Harper was dead 3 weeks before this child was ever told, and that word of his death stopped dead at Brennan's store where this little girl was left to sit on the steps 17 days, looking more abandoned every day, while Mr. Voss's man—" He turned and pointed, and the big man, Briggs, went rigid at the back of the room. "While that man there came into the store 11 times in them 17 days to make sure she was still sitting where she'd been left. I've got the storekeeper's own ledger to prove the dates, 11 times. That ain't a child overlooked, Your Honor. That's a child guarded, like bait." The room had begun to roar low, and Crane hammered for order, and Voss's smooth face had gone very still. Then Abigail Brown stood. "I brought her bread by night," she said, voice shaking and climbing, "'cause I was scared of him, too scared of my note being called, and I'll carry that shame to my grave. But I saw that man come watch her same as the sheriff says. Twice with my own eyes." Then Hollis was up gray and trembling and brave at last, telling how Voss had paid him to scatter the stock in the dark so the child couldn't reach this very courtroom. How Voss had threatened his note and his sick wife, and how a drifter had caught him at the gate and given him 2 roads and told him to pick the one his children could be proud of. One after another, they rose. The late brave, the formerly silent. Each confession pulling the next one up out of its seat, 20 years of bought quiet, coming uncrossed in a single roaring hour in a Cheyenne courtroom, and Judge Crane hammered and could not stop it, because it had stopped being a thing any one man could stop. It was Voss himself who finally rose, and he did it slow, and he raised one pale hand, and the room quieted to hear what the man who owned it all would say. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice was still smooth, still pleasant, but there was a hairline crack in it now that hadn't been there an hour past. "This is theater. Sentiment. A drifter has whipped up a mob of debtors, and a guilty sheriff, and a sentimental cook, and they've put on a fine show. But sentiment is not law. The lien is recorded. The child has no standing. And the question of dates—" The crack widened just slightly. "The question of dates is a matter of clerical interpretation that—" "It ain't interpretation," said a new voice from the courtroom door. "It's my handwriting." Every head turned. The man in the doorway was old and stooped, and wore the ink-stained sleeves of a clerk, and he came down the aisle leaning on a cane, and Ethan had never seen him before in his life. But Voss had, and Voss's face for the first time in the whole long week came entirely apart. "I'm Josiah Penn," the old man said to the bench. 41 years clerk of the county recorder's office, retired this past spring. I recorded both them documents with my own hand, Your Honor, the trust and the lien both, and I'd know my own entries blind. He reached the front and laid a trembling hand on the rail. "And I come 200 miles sick as I am, 'cause I heard there was a child about to be robbed of her water on account of them dates, and I am the one man alive who can tell this court that Harlan Voss came to me private the week after Tom Harper died and offered me $300 to alter the date on Tom's trust deed, to make it read after his lien 'stead of before." The old man's voice shook with something that was half age and half fury. $300 to change a 2 to a different number. I told him no. I'm a poor man and I'm a dying man, and $300 is more than I ever saw at once in my life, and I told him no, because in 41 years I never once falsified a record, and I wasn't about to start, so a rich man could steal an orphan's water. He looked at Voss, and his old eyes blazed. "You didn't think I'd live to tell it, did you? You figured the cancer'd take me 'fore it ever come to court. Well, I ain't dead yet, Harlan, and I aim to spend what I got left making sure you don't get that little girl's spring." The courtroom did not roar this time. It went silent. The deep, total silence of a room that has just watched a thing it will tell its grandchildren about. Even Judge Crane had stopped shuffling his papers. Even Crane was looking at Voss now, and there was a new calculation in the judge's red face. The calculation of a bought man working out very fast that the thing he'd been bought to protect was about to cost more than it paid. That's— Voss's voice failed. He gathered it. "That's the testimony of a senile pauper with a grudge. It's the testimony," Ethan said quietly, "of the one honest man you couldn't buy. And it's the second person this week to stand up and tell this court you tried to bribe or threaten them to steal this child's land. The clerk Marsh threw down his star rather than serve your forged writ. Hollis there confessed you paid him to scatter our stock. And now Mr. Penn says you tried to buy a false date out of the county records." He turned to the bench and his voice rang clear. "Your Honor, you can rule against the truth if you've a mind to. Men have. But you'll be rulin' against a recorded deed. A sheriff, a storekeeper's ledger, 8 sworn witnesses, and the clerk who wrote the dates with his own hand and was offered $300 to change 'em. You'll be doing it in a full courtroom on the record with every word wrote down. And that record don't disappear, sir. That record outlives Mr. Voss's money, and it outlives you." It was the last sentence that did it. It outlives you. Ethan watched the bought judge hear it and understand it that a ruling for Voss today would be a paper that hanged Crane himself tomorrow, the moment a higher court or a territorial governor or a newspaper got hold of 8 sworn statements and a recorder's true book. Voss had bought the judge's verdict. He had not, could not buy the judge's willingness to drown with him. Judge Crane set down his gavel. He did not bang it. He set it down slow, like a man laying down a weight he was relieved to be rid of. "The court," he said heavily, not looking at Voss now, never once looking at Voss again, "finds the trust deed of Tom Harper, recorded the 2nd of March, senior and superior to any lien thereafter. The minor child Daisy Harper is the lawful owner of the Sweetwater quarter section, and its waters held in trust until her majority." He drew a breath. "The court further finds the guardianship order obtained by Mr. Voss to be void, founded upon a false representation of the child's estate, and the court directs the territorial attorney." Here at last, the judge's eyes flicked to Voss one cold, final time to inquire into the matters of bribery, obstruction, and tampering raised by the witnesses Penhollis and Marsh. The gavel came up and down once. "As to custody of the child," he stopped, and the whole room held its breath, because this was the thing. The only thing that had ever truly mattered, not the water, not the land, not Voss's ruin. The child. "As to custody of the child," Crane said, "the court would hear from Mr. Walker. You've no kin to her, no property, no fixed home. By every standard this court applies, you are an unsuitable guardian. Give me one reason I should not place this girl with a respectable family in this city, which I could do within the hour." And Ethan, who had argued the dates and the lien and the bribery, with the cold, steady voice of a man working a horse, found that voice gone, and what came in its place was something rawer and truer than any argument. "I can't give you a reason that'll fit in your books," he said. "You're right. I got no property and no kin and no fixed home. By the book, I'm nothing she needs." He looked down at the child beside him, then back at the bench. "But, Your Honor, 2.5 weeks ago, this little girl sat on a store step 17 days. 17 days with no coat and no proper food, and a whole town walking past her looking away every morning, the same boots, every evening the same eyes turning aside. Respectable families, Your Honor. A whole town of respectable families with fixed homes and property and kin, and not one of them stopped." His voice thickened. "I stopped. I don't say that to make myself big. I say it 'cause it's the only credential I got. Every respectable soul in that town had every reason I lack, and the one thing I had that they didn't was I stopped. I knelt down and I asked her name." The room was silent. "You want to give her to a respectable family inside the hour," Ethan said. "I believe you could. I believe there's good folks in this city'd take her and feed her and raise her kind. But here's what I know about this child that no respectable family's gonna know, 'cause they wasn't there for it. I know she waited 17 days, 'cause her papa told her not to move, and she loved him too much to disobey even when she was starving. I know she guarded a deed against her own skin for a man who was never coming back. I know she stopped reaching for things, 'cause she'd learned wantin' just leads to losin', and I know how to coax her back to reachin', 'cause I had to coax my own self back from the same place after the fever." He had to stop. He pushed through. "And I know that 3 days ago in a cabin yard, she set down the one thing she's clung to since her daddy died. Set down that deed, Your Honor, that she wouldn't give to nobody, and she reached over and took my hand. First thing she'd reached for in days. She reached for me." His eyes were wet, and he let them be. "You can hand her to a stranger inside the hour. Or you can leave her with the man she already chose. The man she reached for. I'd just ask the court to consider that this child has done enough waitin' on enough strangers to last a life. Maybe she don't need another respectable stranger. Maybe she just needs the one fool who stopped walking." For a long moment, nobody in that courtroom breathed. And then the judge, the bought judge, the broken man, who had perhaps somewhere far back of all his corruption, once been somebody's father or somebody's son, looked down from the bench at a 7-year-old in a blue calico dress, and he asked the only question that was left to ask. "Child," Judge Crane said, and his heavy voice had gone almost gentle. You've heard all this. Do you want to go with this man?" And Daisy Harper stood up. She let go of Ethan's hand. He felt it go, and his heart went with it, and she stood up all by herself in front of the whole roaring, silent room. This child, who had been swept at and stepped over and lied to and starved. And she stood as tall as her small body would make her. And she looked the judge dead in the eye, and she did not whisper. She had whispered her whole life. She did not whisper now. "My papa told me to wait on the step," she said, clear and ringing, "and to not move, and I waited 17 days 'cause I trusted him, and he didn't come, and it wasn't his fault, but he didn't come." Her chin was up. "Everybody in that whole town walked past me. Every single one. And this man," she reached out and put her hand flat on Ethan's chest over the certified deed over his heart. "This man knelt down in the dirt and gave me the last food he had and asked me my name. And he told me he was a man who leaves. He told me that his own self, and then he didn't leave. He stayed every single day. He told me no lies, not one, even the hard ones, even when the truth was the worst thing in the world, he had to tell me." Her voice shook now, but it did not fall. "So I already picked. I picked him in the cabin yard. He said a court can't take him away from me, 'cause it wasn't a court that decided it was just me and him. And I'm not going to let you make me wait on a step for somebody else." She turned and looked at the whole courtroom, all of them, the late brave and the ashamed, and the silver lawyers, and the ruined man in black. "I waited long enough. I'm done waiting. I want to go home with my—" She faltered just for a heartbeat on the word, the enormous word, and then she took it and made it hers, the way her father had made the deed, hers written firm and meant to last. "With my pa." The courtroom broke. Abigail Brown wept openly into her hands. Pruitt had his hat off and his head down. Even the bailiff had turned to study the wall, and Judge Crane, in the wreck of the morning, brought his gavel down one last time, soft, almost tender. "Custody of the minor child Daisy Harper," he said, "is granted to Ethan Cole Walker pending formal adoption, which this court will expedite." He looked at the child a moment longer. "Go home, little girl. You waited long enough." Harlan Voss did not stay to hear the rest. He gathered his coat and walked out the back of the courtroom alone. His lawyers already drifting from him, calculating men reading a sinking ship, and he was indicted before the leaves turned on the testimony of a clerk and a cowhand and a dying old recorder who outlived every prediction the cancer made about him, and he lost the bank to the debts he'd built it on, and he left the valley a poorer and smaller man than the drifter he'd once dismissed as a saddle tramp with nothing to lose. He'd been right about Ethan in the end, in the only way that counted. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous. But a man who has finally found something to lose and decided to stand on it instead of run from it. That man is something the Harlan Vosses of the world never see coming, because they have spent their whole lives believing that wanting beats loving, and they are wrong, and they only ever learn it once too late. They went home to the Sweetwater. Henry Dalton signed the cabin and 40 acres over to Ethan for the wages. Tom Harper never collected, and a handshake, and Cole Pruitt helped him run the spring line down to it. And by the next summer, there was a real house going up by the water. Tom Harper had died to keep for his daughter, a house with a child's room in it, and a window that looked out at the spring, the best water in Wyoming territory, and don't you let nobody tell you different. Daisy reached for things again. That was the thing Ethan watched for all that first year, and it came back to her slow, and then all at once, reaching for the milk, for the reins of her own pony, for his hand crossing the yard for the world. The morning she woke, reaching for her papa got further apart, the way he'd promised never gone all the way, but further apart, and on the bad mornings, she came and found Ethan in the dark, and he held her, and they grieved the man together. The father who'd loved her enough to leave her the most precious thing he owned, and they kept his name in the house, and his mare Juniper in the pasture, and his memory clean and whole, because Ethan had never once tried to replace Tom Harper, and never would. He was not her father returned. He was the man who came after, the one who stopped. The adoption papers came through in the fall. She signed her own name to them, Careful in the surveyor's clean hand, Tom Harper had taught her before he died. The only thing he'd had time to teach her of letters, and the name she wrote was not the one the court had typed, and the judge let it stand. Daisy Harper Walker. Not replacing. Adding. One evening, near the end of that first summer, with the house framed up and the spring running silver, and a meal on the table for two, where there'd been a step and a starving child not a year before, Daisy stood in the doorway, looking out at the water that was hers, that her father had died to keep hers, that no man in the territory could ever take from her now. "You didn't leave," she said. She said it the way she'd said it once before in the cabin, but it was different now, not a question, not a test, not a hope held against the dark. A fact, a thing as settled as the spring and the stone and the sky. And Ethan came and stood beside her in the doorway. This man who had buried his own and run 4 years from the graves, who had knelt in the dust of a store step and asked a forgotten child her name, and in the asking had been saved as surely as he saved her. And he put his hand on her shoulder and looked out at the water with her, and he did not say, "I promise." He had stopped trading in promises long ago. He gave her better than a promise. He gave her the truth the way he'd given her every truth, hard and soft alike, since the first. "No," he said. "I stopped running, and I am never going to run again. This is our home. Daisy Harper Walker, and you are my daughter, and that is the one thing left in this whole world that nobody, no town, no court, no man with money is ever going to take from either one of us. Not while I'm breathing. Not ever." And in the long gold quiet that followed, a broken man and a forgotten child stood together in the doorway of the home they had made out of grief and stubbornness and a single decision to stop walking. And they had become the one thing the hard country and the cruel town and the patient thieving men had never once believed could be built from two people the world had thrown away. A family, chosen not given, earned not granted, and theirs now for good.